Conversion chunk number 7 is also does not apply to everybody, but this is where you actually show them how to do things. You can explain to them what to do, even how to do it, but the things that you're explaining how to do, they need to know more. They need to understand more in order to do it correctly. So a great example of this that I've talked about before is when many moons ago, when I was selling an expensive training program to chiropractors, really the interesting thing was that I showed them, I explained what they needed to do. I even explained how they needed to do certain things, like you got to go, register a domain name. You want to set up hosting. I actually, as part of the marketing, I brought them over to an example host, excuse me. And I actually walked them through how to do this, but I did not walk them through exactly how to install WordPress on their server. I didn't explain to them how to install the plugins. I showed them where to find the plugins. Like I explained the plugins, I explained what the plugins would do, right? I walked them through it. And so I walked them through the detail, but I knew that there was more instruction that they would need to actually be able to execute. So really behind the scenes, what we're talking about here is you being able to deliver value, you being able to teach, you being able to educate, you telling them what to do, you telling them how to do certain things, knowing that they're going to need more information from you, more guidance from you, more instruction, maybe even more hand-holding. Right? This kind of thing is great if you offer a service, if you offer done for you, if you offer a very deep, intensive information product or training program, something like that. This is a great conversion chunk because all it does is create more demand for the thing that you're selling, right? If they need to know more to do it correctly, and the only place that they can get that more is through your product or service, all this does is build more demand for your product or service, right? It makes them want your product or service more, because as you're explaining to them what to do and how to do it, even the things that they need to know more to do correctly, you're again explaining why it's important. You're explaining and teaching them the payoff, the benefit. You're explaining to them and teaching them when they do this, the mistakes that they'll avoid and the ramifications of those mistakes that they'll never have to experience. And so you're building value around being able to do this correctly. And again, in this context, they won't necessarily understand how stealth this really is and how deep psychologically this really runs. Most prospects, they're gonna feel like they need to know more to do it correctly, but they're not gonna put that on you. They're gonna think that could be an individual thing. They're gonna think to themselves, this sounds great. I understand why. I love how deep he or she is explaining this to me, but I need to know more in order to do this correctly. They're gonna think that it's themselves, it's them that need more. They're not gonna say, oh, you left something out, right? They're gonna look at it as they personally need more help. Maybe others don't, but they do, and it makes doing it correctly that much more valuable, and so it sets up the sale of your product or service. And so that is conversion chunk number 7. Conversion chunk number 8 is you explaining why the common approach is not the best, right? And so this is where you've got the opportunity. It does not matter what you are offering. If you're offering a service, if you're offering a software, if you're offering consulting or coaching or an information product, or even if you sell a physical product, and let's say you sell, you sell backpacks, and the way that your backpack is assembled is very different from the typical commoditized backpack that they could get at Target or something like that, or Macy's, whatever it is. Well, you have the opportunity to explain. You're in essence, right? You are pointing out the flaws in the common approach. Right? And so you're not pointing out necessarily, we're not talking about you pointing out flaws in competitors. We're not talking about you talking negatively about a competitor. We're talking about you highlighting and educating the prospect on the pitfalls of the common approach, right? So this could be, this could be the you name it. This could be the the personal trainer pointing out the flaw in a ketogenic diet, or the flaws in a ketogenic diet, or flaws in intermittent fasting, or whatever it may be. They might take the top 3 or 4 diets that they're competing with, and they might just explain the pitfalls of those different approaches. See, by pointing out the pitfalls or the negatives of those common approaches, what it does is it creates demand for a different way. It creates a demand for an alternative solution. That alternative solution is your solution, right? And all you're doing here is equipping the prospect to understand both logically and emotionally why they don't want to go with the common approach. See, if you present your marketing message and you're presenting your diet program, let's say you're a personal trainer, you're a nutritionist, and you're presenting your diet program, and you're presenting it to folks that obviously, let's say, want to lose weight, want to get in shape, and they don't buy. Well, in their mind, right, the typical prospect is going to go somewhere else. The typical prospect is thinking there's another route, another method, another solution, another path that they can take to lose weight. This conversion chunk addresses that other path that they're considering and thinking about is not the right way to go, and why. And that's the key, and why. The and why is the education-based marketing. If all you did was say it's not the right path and you didn't tell them the why, right? That's not education. That's simply just selling. That's you trying to convince them of something just because you're saying it. It's the and why that becomes the education, right? And so you're teaching them. I want you to think about this. You are opening their eyes. You're enlightening them to why the other approaches, the other methods, the other solutions, the other mechanisms that you are competing with, or that they see and believe that you are competing with, why those are not the best. And you're teaching them. You are educating them. And certainly, like, look, if you really want to get super savvy here, if you can show them how the common approach not only comes with a bunch of negatives, but also comes with the exact negatives that they don't want, right? Like, if there are things that the prospect is trying to avoid, if there are things that the prospect is trying to stay away from, if there are things that the prospect is trying to move away from, that they want less of in their life, and you could show them how these common methods actually will cause them to experience those things that they don't want to experience, that's even more powerful. But here you are simply teaching them why the common approach or approaches are not the best. Next, conversion chunk number 9, highlight the mistakes that they're making. Now this might seem similar to this, but this conversion chunk is you educating on the common methods, right? The common approaches. So the common, like the industry accepted methods that most people have accepted. So if you were talking to bodybuilders, for example, about growing more muscle, you would be addressing the common training methods that most average bodybuilders use. Over here in conversion chunk number 9, you're highlighting the mistakes that the typical prospect is making, right? So this is the typical mistakes that the average prospect is making. So whereas this is more specific to a particular protocol or approach or method, right? This is specific to what are the mistakes that the typical prospect is making. What are the ramifications of those mistakes? And then really, right, you want to highlight how your method, your product, your service, your solution helps them to stop making those mistakes, right? So we're always pointing out mistakes here that our product or service fixes, that our product or service will help them overcome. So, right, so if it's, one of the mistakes, let's say we're talking about bodybuilders again, that they are not getting enough protein. Well, your method, right, we would mention that only if your method addresses that. If they weren't, if your method, if one of the mistakes is training too light, weights are too light, your method addresses that. If it's training, too often, not allowing for enough rest and recovery, well, your method needs to address that. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, these are mistakes and why. And these are the ramifications. This is why, you know, if you do this, you won't grow muscle. If you do this, you won't recover. Therefore, you'll overtrain. You'll get tired. If you don't do this, you'll expose yourself to injury, which means you'll wind up blah, 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 right? And so we're painting this gruesome picture. That's why the blah, blah, blah method is so powerful, because it ensures you get enough protein so that you do build muscle. It ensures that you are training heavy enough so that you can stimulate muscular growth every time you're in the gym. It ensures that you get enough recovery so that you don't get tired, you don't expose yourself to injury, and so that you can continue to grow. And ultimately it blah, 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 blah. See how this one little chunk, this one little piece of content, which can be an email, can be a video, can be a Facebook Live, can be an extra webinar, right? That you like, look, I want you to look at this for 1 second, right? You could take this topic right here, the mistakes that they're making, right? And if we were, again, just using this, going with this example of bodybuilders, this could be an extra webinar that we attach to the back of any marketing campaign. If they haven't bought after 2 days of seeing the offer, that just gives us another opportunity to market, to educate, and to ultimately present the offer again. And this could just be the 6 mistakes holding, you know, the 6 mistakes the average bodybuilder makes that holds them back from ever getting big. Right? Like, and so see how it's another chunk of content that leads to the sale, because it gives you another opportunity to educate, to create demand, and to present the offer. And so that is conversion chunk number 9. Conversion chunk number 10 is tell them what not to do and why. And so this is, right, so this is also very similar to this. Let's just call it the sister of this. This one is highlight the mistakes that they're making. This one is tell them what not to do. And tell them why, right? So this is kind of like, the way that I want you to think about this, the way that I approach this is, think of the opposite of what it is that you would have them do as part of your, let's say, if you're a consultant, if you're a coach, if you're a trainer, if you run a live event, if you've got a service that you offer, what is it that you would tell them to do, right? And why? And then I just want you to think about what's the opposite of that, right? Like, what is the opposite of that? So like, let's say, you know, you could look at, let's say, the big idea, for example, and we always talk about, like, you know, you don't want to scream a louder promise, right? That's working less and less, right? And so you want to instead use you want to use a big idea, blah, blah, blah. And so one of the things not to do is you don't want to attempt to get attention by screaming a louder promise, right? What not to do. You don't want to have a marketing message that is void of any logic, that is all emotion. And the reason why is blah, blah, blah. And so what I would be doing is I would be presenting the opposite of everything that I ultimately would teach or give them it with my method, because, right, telling them what not to do and why, and again, I just want to stress the why not to do it is the important part, right? Because the why not to do it is we want to show them, and let me just take a drink. Because, excuse me, what I want you to think about here is we tell them what not to do and why. The why not to do it is the ramifications, the result, right? Or lack of result. We want to show them that the results that they are either the negative results, the problems, the obstacles, the issues, the struggle that they are experiencing is because they are likely doing one of these things that we're telling them not to do. And the way that we can resolve that is, right, like with your method. Right? So you don't scream a louder promise. You don't have a pure emotional message. If you want to stand out, if you want to get attention, if you want to lead people to buy in a cool way that delivers value, instead of screaming a louder promise, you want a big idea. Instead of having just a pure sales message that's emotional, you want a mix of logic and emotion. And that's why I put together the E5 method, because it does just that for you. It blah, 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 blah. Right? And so we're telling them what not to do and why not to do it, which is the opposite of what it is that we're teaching, so that we can contrast all the negatives of all the things that they shouldn't be doing against all the positives associated with what they should be doing, which is our method. That is conversion chunk number 10. Conversion chunk number 11 is equip them to spot bogus information.